While the world watched Washington and Brussels argue over tariffs and treaties, something far bigger was happening in a city most people can't even pronounce. Over 20 nations just rewrote the rules of global power, and the West wasn't even in the room. There's a tectonic shift happening right now in global politics. And no, it didn't start in the White House, the halls of Brussels, or the glass towers of Manhattan. It began thousands of miles away in Kuala Lumpur, a city that rarely makes international headlines. But what took place there could define the next 50 years of geopolitics. China didn't just host a conference. It orchestrated something far more deliberate. More than 20 countries gathered under a single vision. On the surface, it looked like just another diplomatic event. Leaders in suits, handshakes for cameras, the usual formalities. But beneath that polished exterior, the foundation for a massive economic realignment was being quietly cemented. This wasn't theater, it was strategy. Southeast Asia, the Gulf, China. 3 regions now moving in sync. Together they represent over $25 trillion in economic firepower. That's not a typo, 25 trillion. And we're talking about more than 2 billion people whose futures are now being tied together through infrastructure, energy deals, and trade corridors that bypass the West entirely. For years, we've been told that BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, was the counterweight to Western dominance, the rising bloc, the challenger. But here's the thing. BRICS has been struggling. Internal rivalries, clashing national interests, and geopolitical baggage have held it back. India and China can barely agree on a border, let alone a shared economic vision. Russia's isolation has deepened. Brazil's political chaos has made long-term planning nearly impossible. What's emerging now is different. It's leaner, more focused, and disturbingly effective. This new alignment isn't built on ideology or grand speeches. It's built on something far more powerful: mutual economic interest. And it's already responsible for more than half of global economic growth. Let that sink in. Over half. These countries are shaping supply chains, controlling energy flows, dictating capital movement, and leading technological innovation. All while the United States remains distracted by its own internal battles. Beijing hasn't been sitting idle while Washington argues. It's been building. Rail lines cutting through Indonesia. Energy partnerships locking in Gulf nations for decades. Infrastructure weaving across Asia like a web. These aren't random investments scattered across a map. They're pieces of a coordinated design, and the implications. They're no longer hypothetical. They're here. The real question now isn't whether this shift is happening. It's how far it will go, and what it means for American power in a world that's quickly learning to function without it. Let's talk about what actually happened in that room in Kuala Lumpur. ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, sat down with the Gulf Cooperation Council and China. On paper, it was a regional summit. In reality, it was the early scaffolding of something much larger. A consolidated economic bloc with the potential to pull the global center of gravity eastward. Do the math. Combined GDP? Over $25 trillion. Population? More than 2 billion. Growth contribution to the world economy? Roughly 55%. This isn't a future scenario analysts are warning about. This is the present. These nations are already the engine room of global growth. Now imagine what happens if they begin coordinating. Trade policies, energy agreements, investment frameworks, technology standards. If these countries start moving in unison, the established powers, the United States, the European Union, won't just notice. They'll scramble. Here's where it gets interesting. BRICS, for all its hype, has struggled to deliver. The tensions are well documented. India and China eye each other with suspicion. Brazil's economy swings wildly depending on who's in office. Russia, since its invasion of Ukraine, has become a pariah in much of the world. These aren't small problems, they're structural cracks. But this newer formation, it's different. It's rooted in something tangible. Existing trade routes, energy dependency, infrastructure that's already operational. These aren't symbolic handshakes. This is the slow, deliberate construction of parallel systems, financial channels that don't run through New York, settlement mechanisms that don't rely on the dollar, logistics networks that don't depend on Western shipping lanes, regulatory frameworks that don't wait for approval from Washington or Brussels. That's why Kuala Lumpur mattered. It wasn't just another summit. It was a signal, a declaration. The Global South isn't content to play by rules written 70 years ago in a world that no longer exists. It wants a seat at the table where those rules are written. Or better yet, it wants its own table, and it's building one. While this was happening, where was the United States? Stuck. Paralyzed by internal divisions. Consumed by partisan warfare. Yes, America remains the world's largest economy in nominal terms. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Its ability to unilaterally set the rules of global trade is fading. Look at what's happening with its traditional allies. The European Union just finalized sweeping trade agreements across South America, deals that don't involve Washington at all. Vietnam, once heavily reliant on U.S. markets, has signed trade pacts with the EU and Canada to diversify its export destinations. Japan and South Korea, two of America's closest security partners in Asia, are deepening economic ties across the region, deliberately reducing their dependence on any single market. Individually, these moves might seem small, routine adjustments. But add them up, and a pattern emerges. The centrality of the United States in global commerce is eroding. And when Washington's go-to policy tool becomes tariffs, blunt, punitive, unpredictable, its partners start looking elsewhere. Many of those alternate routes lead straight to Beijing. Take Southeast Asia. Indonesia, for example, has historically walked a tightrope between Washington and Beijing, maintaining strong trade ties with both. But then came the tariffs, a 10% duty slapped on a range of Indonesian goods. Almost overnight, Indonesia's trade surplus with the U.S. shrank. Meanwhile, imports of industrial machinery and equipment from China and Singapore surged. It might look like a minor data point in a spreadsheet, but it's not. It's a structural shift. Economic necessity, not ideology, is pulling countries toward China. When access to one major market tightens, alternatives become attractive fast. Across the developing world, similar recalculations are underway. Old dependencies are loosening. New networks are forming. And what started in Kuala Lumpur may well be remembered as the moment when the global economic axis began its unmistakable tilt toward Asia, with Beijing at its center. The shift isn't loud, it's not dramatic, but it's real, and it's accelerating. Vietnam's story is a perfect case study. When the Trump administration imposed steep tariffs on steel and aluminum, Vietnam felt it immediately. Steel exports to the United States collapsed, down 27% in the first months of 2025. For a country whose economy runs on exports, this wasn't just a speed bump. It was an existential threat. But Hanoi didn't fold. It pivoted, hard. Vietnam turned to China and its neighbors, and the numbers tell the story. In 2024, trade between Asian economies and China hit $982 billion. That's nearly one-fifth of Asia's total trade. And projections for 2025? Even higher. But this isn't just about lowering tariffs. The new trade arrangements prioritize future-facing industries, digital infrastructure, renewable energy, advanced manufacturing. The sectors that will define the next 30 years. And the results are already visible. A major freight rail link now connects Malaysia directly to Chongqing, slashing transit times and tightening integration with China's industrial heartland. In Indonesia, a multi-billion-dollar high-speed rail line between Jakarta and Bandung, built under China's Belt and Road Initiative, has carried over 9 million passengers since it opened in late 2023. These aren't just infrastructure projects, they're strategic anchors. ASEAN is no longer just a collection of mid-sized economies trying to balance between rival powers. It's transforming into a production powerhouse, deeply integrated with China's industrial ecosystem and critical to global supply chains. Every rail line, every industrial park, every logistics hub strengthens Asia's internal connectivity. And with each one, reliance on Western-led systems weakens just a little bit more. The transformation is visible at sea, too. Port expansions in Malaysia and Indonesia, many backed by Chinese capital, are increasing cargo capacity and rerouting trade flows that once depended heavily on Western shipping corridors. These ports aren't just commercial terminals. They're strategic assets, reshaping how goods move across the region and locking Southeast Asia into an Asia-first trade architecture. Now let's talk energy, because that's where the real power has always been. For decades, American influence was tied to one simple fact: oil was traded in dollars. That gave Washington enormous leverage. Control the currency of energy, control the world. But that's changing. A growing share of Saudi oil exports is now being settled in currencies other than the dollar. In 2023, China and France's TotalEnergies signed the first-ever liquefied natural gas deal priced in yuan. It was symbolic, sure, but symbols matter. They signal where the wind is blowing. Multinational energy firms are preparing for a world where the dollar isn't the only game in town. A multi-currency environment is no longer theoretical. It's becoming operational. And then there's renewables. This is where China's dominance becomes almost absurd. It controls the overwhelming majority of global solar panel production. It leads in wind turbine exports. It dominates the supply chains for batteries. Whether the world runs on oil or transitions to clean energy, China is positioned at the center. Energy diversification isn't just about going green. It's about redistributing geopolitical power. Let's not forget the Gulf. The Gulf Cooperation Council, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, Bahrain, Oman, and Qatar, has been Washington's anchor in the Middle East for generations. Defense partnerships, energy coordination, diplomatic alignment, but that's shifting too. Trade between the Gulf states and ASEAN hit $130 billion in 2023, and it's projected to climb much higher by 2032. Crucially, these ties aren't just about oil anymore. They're expanding into artificial intelligence, fintech, renewable energy, fields where Asian economies are, honestly, surging ahead. The political messaging reflects this. At the Kuala Lumpur summit, Indonesia's leadership publicly supported positions aligned with Beijing's pushback against external dominance. They expressed solidarity with Palestine, positions that resonated strongly with Gulf governments. It's not just economics, it's alignment. A gradual convergence of Asian and Arab perspectives in a world that's increasingly multipolar. From Southeast Asia to the Arabian Peninsula, a new web of cooperation is forming. One that doesn't need Western approval. One that operates outside the institutions built after World War II. What started as pragmatic trade diversification is evolving into something more ambitious. An autonomous economic and political bloc capable of functioning independently from the United States and its traditional allies. For Washington, this isn't just a diplomatic inconvenience. It's a structural crisis. The post-World War II order, the system America built and led for nearly 80 years, is under sustained pressure, not from military threats or ideological rivals, but from economic realities and shifting alliances that are constructing parallel mechanisms of cooperation. The question isn't whether change is happening, it's how fast this new alignment will consolidate, and how profoundly it will reshape the global balance of power. American policymakers are waking up to a world where tariffs don't scare partners into compliance. They push them toward alternatives, where infrastructure deals and trade corridors matter more than military bases, where influence is measured not in aircraft carriers, but in high-speed rail lines, port capacity, and currency swap agreements. This is the new competition. And it's being fought on terrain where the United States hasn't always invested. So here we are. A conference in Kuala Lumpur that most of the world ignored may turn out to be one of the most consequential gatherings of the decade. Not because of what was said, but because of what was set in motion. An economic alignment spanning Southeast Asia, the Gulf, and China. Over $25 trillion, more than 2 billion people, the majority of global growth. While Washington wrestled with internal divisions, Beijing was building, quietly, methodically, strategically. And now, the world is waking up to a reality that's already here. The global center of gravity is shifting, the rules are being rewritten, and this time, the West isn't holding the pen. The only question left is this: will America adapt to this new world, or keep pretending the old one still exists? If this video made you rethink what you thought you knew about global power, hit that like button and subscribe. The world is changing faster than the headlines can keep up, and we're here to connect the dots. Drop a comment. Do you think the United States can counter this shift, or is the era of Western dominance quietly coming to an end? Let's talk about it. See you in the next one.